You probably assume eating bugs was something ancient people only did out of desperation, a last resort when nothing else was available. That's not actually true, and in most of the world, for most of human history, it wasn't desperation at all. It was simply dinner, chosen deliberately over other options that were often harder to get. To understand why insects were such a common food source throughout human history, you have to set aside the modern Western assumption that bugs are inherently disgusting or beneath consideration. That reaction isn't universal, and it isn't ancient either. Anthropologists estimate that insects have been part of the human diet for as long as humans have existed, likely predating agriculture entirely, and evidence of insect consumption appears across nearly every inhabited continent, spanning tens of thousands of years. This is the part that most people never learn. Insects weren't a fallback food eaten only when starvation loomed. In many regions, they were actively preferred over other available protein sources, and for genuinely practical reasons. Insects are extraordinarily easy to gather compared to hunting large game, which requires tracking, weapons, coordinated group effort, and carries real physical risk. A person could gather a substantial, protein-dense meal of insects in a fraction of the time and effort required to bring down a single large animal, with none of the danger. Nutritionally, insects were also a remarkably efficient choice, something ancient people understood through direct experience long before anyone measured it scientifically. Many edible insect species are extremely high in protein, healthy fats, and essential micronutrients like iron and zinc, often at concentrations that rival or exceed those found in beef, pork, or chicken. Termites, for example, contain roughly comparable protein levels to red meat, while requiring dramatically less effort and risk to obtain. But there was a problem with treating this as simply a story of universal ancient practicality. Insect consumption wasn't just about survival efficiency, and reducing it to pure calculation misses something culturally significant. In numerous ancient societies, specific insects held genuine culinary status, prepared with real skill, and even served as delicacies rather than emergency rations. Ancient Assyrian carvings dating back nearly 3,000 years depict attendants carrying locusts on ceremonial skewers, presented specifically for royal consumption, suggesting insects occupied a position of genuine prestige rather than desperation in at least some ancient courts. Ancient Greek and Roman texts reference cicadas and beetle larvae as genuinely enjoyed foods, and Aristotle himself wrote fairly detailed observations about the ideal timing for harvesting cicadas for the best flavor, suggesting a level of culinary consideration that goes well beyond mere survival necessity. Roman writer Pliny the Elder described wealthy Romans specifically prizing beetle larvae fattened on flour and wine, a preparation method requiring deliberate cultivation and genuine culinary effort, not the behavior of people eating insects purely because nothing else was available. Here's the surprising part most people never consider. Across many regions of the world, insect consumption didn't decline because people discovered it was somehow inferior or unpleasant. It declined specifically in Western societies due to a complex combination of urbanization, changing agricultural systems, and eventually, deliberate cultural stigmatization that took hold gradually over centuries. As European societies industrialized and became increasingly disconnected from direct food gathering, insects became culturally coded as primitive or beneath consideration, a perception actively reinforced through colonial-era attitudes that dismissed indigenous food practices across Africa, Asia, and the Americas as backward, despite those very practices often being nutritionally and environmentally superior to the livestock-based systems replacing them. Meanwhile, in large portions of the world, this cultural shift never fully took hold, and insect consumption simply continued as an unremarkable part of daily culinary life. Today, an estimated 2 billion people worldwide regularly consume insects as part of their standard diet, particularly across regions of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Countries like Thailand, Mexico, and numerous nations across Central Africa maintain rich, sophisticated culinary traditions built around specific insect species, prepared with techniques refined across many generations, treated with the same seriousness and skill as any other traditional protein source. The environmental case for insect consumption has become increasingly relevant in recent decades, adding a modern layer to this ancient practice. Insects require dramatically less land, water, and feed to produce the same amount of protein compared to traditional livestock, and they produce a small fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with cattle farming specifically. This has driven renewed Western scientific and commercial interest in insect protein, though widespread cultural acceptance in regions where the practice declined remains a significant, ongoing challenge, largely due to psychological and cultural barriers, rather than any genuine nutritional or practical drawback. Insect consumption story spans the entire length of human existence, present since before agriculture began, valued in some ancient societies as genuine delicacy rather than desperate necessity, disrupted specifically in the West through industrialization and colonial-era cultural bias, and never actually interrupted at all across much of the rest of the world, where it remains, today, exactly what it always was, an efficient, nutritious, and often genuinely enjoyed part of ordinary daily life. Here's the big lesson buried in all of this. What one culture considers disgusting, another culture considers dinner, and neither reaction is really about the food itself. It's almost entirely about exposure, familiarity, and inherited cultural narrative, not about any actual, objective quality of the food in question. Insects didn't become less nutritious or less practical when large portions of the Western world decided they were repulsive. The insects didn't change at all, only the story being told about them changed. And that story, once it took hold, was powerful enough to override centuries of practical logic and genuine nutritional advantage. It's worth asking, the next time something strikes you as instinctively disgusting or beneath consideration, whether that reaction is based on the thing itself or on a story you inherited without ever actually examining it. Somewhere in the world tonight, someone is enjoying a perfectly ordinary insect-based meal that you might currently find unthinkable. And the only real difference between the two of you is which story you happen to grow up believing.